On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
Well, the most important thing that happened this week was that Dad went to the vet, probably because he had a dry nose or something.
Well, I dislike the winter, I dislike injections, and I dislike being told what to do by the government. So, guess how much fun I'm having in this particular day. Yes, Graham is driving us to Barnstable, so the two of us can have our COVID booster inoculations, the ones that originally were never going to be needed because the first and then the second COVID injection were going to make us into a master race, Homo superior, who could manage to avoid the predations of this nasty virus, which of course came from various laboratories in China and wasn't anything to do with people eating bats.
I ate a bat once, but it wasn't very nice. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody.
And so Graham and I went into the Barnstable Leisure Centre thingy and we had our injections. And then we came out again. One of the weirdest things about the injections, however, was the fact that the hall was full of maybe 30 inoculation stations, and that is a wonderful piece of alliteration I did my best not to use, but I couldn't think of another one. And each of these inoculation stations was manned either by a civilian nurse or by a soldier in battle dress. And I really, really wanted to film one of these soldiers in battle dress giving injections to civilians as if they were all part of a Quatermass movie sometime in the late 50s. But I didn't. Why? Because I am occasionally sensible, and the camera I was using was my iPad, and I didn't want to be obviously pointing an iPad camera at a bunch of soldiers in battle dress, because that's the sort of thing that gets you sent to Guantanamo Bay or wherever British people who have transgressed against the rules of society to that extent go, and I think the answer to that is probably Diego Garcia. But I don't know, you don't know, and I wasn't about to find out. So then we got my wheelchair back in the car and we went all the way home again. And why am I telling you this? Simple, really. It's because these days you don't know where the truth and the reality begins and where the jokes, the fantasy and the conspiracy theories end. Because the world is so confusing these days, none of it makes sense. No sense makes a sense, as somebody once said. And that's partly the job of this show, because although we are a show about the natural world, we're also a show about the weird stuff which gets reflected from the natural world, which I think is probably just a natural part of the way things are, but it seems to be very, very prevalent at the moment. Oh, I do like it when Mr. Jon gets all metaphysical.
I really like the old credits.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's Jon Dan, as you probably know already. But rather than me telling you how I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology and all sorts of other stuff, look at this. I've got a new camera, so I can actually talk to you in 2 split screens, as if I was being Joe Cocker back at Woodstock. That is, of course, if Joe Cocker had been a fat cryptozoologist with a small dog on his knee and a little cat under his elbow, singing a song about Himalayan man-beasts. Do you believe in the yeti? Yes, I'm certain people see it all the time. Or the Beatles in the rooftop concert as done by Peter Jackson. Yes, I haven't got the colour signature of this other camera quite right yet, but I'm going to get Computer Boy to sort that out. But I'm having great fun playing with it. And I've also got another new toy which is going to be very useful for the show. It's a new program which helps me to animate the animals who live here better than I would have been able to otherwise.
Do you mean like this, Daddy?
However, I do have a few problems with Lilith because of her darker pigmentation, which means that it's very difficult to see the contrast when she's animated.
Are you saying this colour is black?
Yes, Lilith, I am, but I prefer to use the word partially melanistic, and I have no idea whatsoever what the algorithms at YouTube, which are the arbiters of all taste and decency, are going to make of this exchange of views. Well, let's see if we can finish up the story of what happened to us at Bolam Lake all those years ago, because from when you're watching this, it was practically 19 years ago to the day. And if you want to catch up on the backstory, it's in last week's episode and in the last episode before we had Christmas, and we stopped for jolly festive episodes. After having seen whatever it was that I saw capering through the undergrowth, I went off into the darkness to try to gather my thoughts. Now, I've never made any secret of the fact that in my misspent youth and even in my misspent middle age, I took quite a few recreational drugs. Those days are long behind me, mainly because I feel so rubbish most of the time. The idea of taking other stuff to make me feel weirder is just really ludicrous, so I just don't. And I gave up smoking cigarettes 5 years ago this week, and when I gave up smoking cigarettes, I gave up smoking joints as well. Not that I did it very often, even then. But I, for the first time in my life, I've been drug-free for about 5 years, which is, from the point of view of my life as it's been over the time, is quite an achievement. But I'm explaining this because of what happened next. I went off into the darkness to try and gather my thoughts, and the only substance that I was abusing then was a cigarette. Care of Mr. Benson and Mr. Hedges. So, while I was in the darkness, something very strange began to happen to me. I felt the tips of my fingers tingle, and I felt my blood pressure go up, and I felt the unmistakable signs of what used to happen some years before then, when I was prone to investigating the effects of recreational opiates. My favourite was always raw opium, and back in the day there was a little hippie guy who lived on one of the little wooded valleys on the south side of Dartmoor, who had a little small holding where, amongst other things, he grew opium poppies and made his own opium, some of which ended up making its way to me and my circle of friends. I was the only person within the CFZ who ever did opiates, and I neither regret or am proud of the fact that I did them. I just did them. And as far as what happened next is concerned, it's probably a good thing that I did do them, because within 5 minutes of me and some of my companions having seen what looked like a tall, spindly humanoid figure jumping from one side of a little forest clearing and back to the other side, I felt like I had smoked a big lot of nice raw opium, and I was completely stoned, completely high, and it got me thinking, why on earth can something that I had subjectively seen, how on earth could that have such a physiological effect upon my central nervous system? I discovered that one of the things that opiates do to the human body is that they make the human body mimic the production of endorphins, the pleasure chemicals, which amongst other things are released during sex. And apparently there are 2 substances which can mimic these effects. One of them is opiates and the other one is chocolate. By the way, I usually take a lot of care with the continuity of my long pieces to camera. They're usually recorded in 6 or 7 different slices, but I try to make it appear as if they're all recorded in one. But on this case, I have not been able to. I wonder if you can see why. Because I have a little dog, a little cat, and a slightly larger cat, all involved with what I'm doing, and there's nothing I can do really to stop it, apart from shove the animals on the floor, and I wouldn't do that. That's not what the CFZ ethos is all about. So please forgive the fact that the continuity has gone out of the window. No sooner had I recorded that last community announcement, but Archie and Lilith went off hell for leather to investigate what Graham was doing in the kitchen, and I'm left with Dottie, who doesn't like me very much, who's looking very supercilious over my shoulder. However, on with the story. Possibly the strangest thing of all is that the effect of the endorphins, if that's what they were, still was with me, not abated at all 2 days later. And it was only really on the Monday morning that they started to clear. However, on the Sunday afternoon we'd all taken the day off and we went over to Dave and Joanne Curtis for lunch. And as anybody who's ever met Dave Curtis will know, that having lunch with the Curtises, especially on a time when you're feeling more than slightly pleased with yourself, because seldom has a fortune zoological investigation gone so well, a few small amounts, who am I trying to kid, quite large amounts of alcohol were consumed. And I'm not really making an excuse here, because I got completely carried away, and I think that the endorphins, or whatever they were, contributed to the fact that the alcohol had a bigger effect on my system than one would have liked, and I found all sorts of people including Nick Redfern and Lauren Coleman in America, to tell them all about what had happened. And from what I can gather from what Lauren told me more recently, I came over like an incoherent drunk, rather than as a intrepid explorer into the outer edges of Fortiana. And every time I speak to Lauren since, I always apologise to him. We went back to Bolam Lake on the Monday morning, and we finished up our measuring and mapping. We checked the sand traps that we had put out there on the Saturday, but not really to anybody's surprise that there had been no huge humanoid footprints found there. By the way, if you don't know what a sand trap is, it's when you make a layer of fine sand, like the stuff you get from a garden centre, and make it, 10-12 feet across, and you put a piece of bait, usually fresh meat, in the middle of it. The idea being that whatever animal comes to take the bait, it will leave footprints in the sand. It's a great idea and it works very well, except when you're hunting anomalous, amorphous anthropoids. And that was not a bad piece of alliteration, even though what I saw was most definitely not an anthropoid. Now, I've never been able to estimate distance, and so I've taught myself a handy little trick that when I see something that I want to know the distance of, I, rather than trying to estimate it, I make a note of landmarks in my head that I can actually use as vantage points, frames of reference when I go back. And that's what we did on the Monday. And the distance between the two dead trees, between which I saw the thing, whatever it was, running and running back, was far too far for a normal human being to have been able to jump. Not that I actually thought that what I'd seen was a normal human being, but I suppose, in theory at least, that one could have got some incredibly honed athlete, I don't know, one of the American Harlem Globetrotter basketball players or something, stripped him naked, had him completely matte black so nothing showed, no details showed up in the car headlights, and had him doing some sort of bizarre ballet dancing steps across the distance that I noted, then I suppose it could have been done. But when we went back there on the Monday, we actually went out to that little gap between the trees, and it was several inches deep in water, and anything heavier than a frog would, in my humble opinion, have sunk into the mud. And there were no signs of finely honed and highly trained American athletes neck deep in quicksand anywhere to be seen. And that evening all of us went back to the Dordon Miners' Welfare Club, and we didn't drink anything like as much as we had done at Davy Curtis's at lunch the day before, but we had a few beers and we got chatting to an old miner who, for some reason, had taken an interest in us and what we were doing. And we told him how on the Saturday there had been so much trouble with the electrical equipment failing and batteries dying, and he said, and I'm not even going to attempt to do the accent, and this is an old fellow well into his 80s, said, "You do know that there's big veins of magnetite all across that area, don't you?" We didn't, and indeed I didn't really know what magnetite was. But I looked it up when we got back to Exeter, and it is highly magnetic iron ore. And yes, apparently there is a lot of it in that area. All the pieces are now in place. Richard and I, over the next month or so, came up with what we think is quite a cogent explanation for what had happened, and indeed for a lot of things that people report seeing in the Fortean zoological oeuvre, as it were. But I'm not going to tell you about it now, not because I am being horribly clickbaity or anything else baity, but because I want to do it when Richard's up here next, because Richard and I probably will tell the story and explain stuff better together. So I've done what I promised. I've told you what happened up at Bolam Lake 19 years ago this week, and very soon, when Richard comes back, I will tell you all about the theory that he and I have come up with.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it? So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the end of another episode. I want to say a big thank you to Louis, because Louis is trying very hard to make it that this show makes cryptozoology relevant to young people.
John, as I've told you, young people don't need cryptozoology. We've got Chick-fil-A.
Well, I don't approve of that. I think that is very tasteless, and I'm going to lodge a complaint with the authorities. Well, I'm not sure who the authorities are to which Hennis is referring, but if I'm the authorities, I will state now, once and for all, that I am going to never have anything to do with Chick-fil-A or any other chicken-eating organisation in this show. Capiche? And here I'd like to make another interjection. There is more than a bit about recreational drug taking in this episode. I want here to say not only do I not take drugs anymore, but I do not recommend them to anybody, and like I said to one of my nephews, of whom I'm very fond, some years ago, if you want to drink, smoke and take drugs, go ahead, but you'll have a body and a physiology like mine by the time you're in middle age, and by the time you're my age, you won't be able to walk anymore. Anyway, after that little interlude, back to what I was saying. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's worked on this episode, and it's really nice now that we've got the festive season over with that we're getting back to some semblance of normality. So big thank you to Graham and to Louis and to Carl and to Miss Maxine and Miss Charlie and to Miss Sarah, who are all wonderful girls and do amazing things for the CFZ, which lots of people never see. And a big thank you to everybody else who's been involved this time. But before we go, you know I'm always telling you about how the CFZ is a family, and families sadly sometimes lose people and happily sometimes gain people. Well, another one of the CFZ chicks from about 8 years ago has had a baby. Chloe, who I am sure you will remember was my assistant at the time of the last Weird Weekend back in 2016, has very recently had a little boy called Noah. Congratulations to all of young Noah's loved ones, and with a name like Noah, it won't be long, I'm sure, before he's part of the ever-growing ARC, which is the CFZ. So thank you to everybody. And just in case you're too sad that the CFZ show on the track is over for this week, don't worry, because it's only 7 more days until 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That made no sense at all. It's only 7 more days till next Saturday afternoon. On next Saturday afternoon, I'm going to be here. I hope you're going to be here, because if I'm here and you're there, I'll be seeing you.